Hello and welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Chris Gray. On tonight's show, is buying a property under company title something of the past, or are they still available? Completed properties versus off the plan. What is the main difference in strategy and which is right for you? And when buying property, does it make a difference where we're at in the property cycle? But first up, let's check in with Charles Tarbey from Century 21 Australasia, and let's see what's happening with the property market around Australia. Welcome, Charles.
Yeah, g'day, Chris. I've got 5 stats for you tonight. I usually have 4, but I've got my golf score, which was a pretty bad stat to start with, and my caddy, my young caddy Zane Paddock, is not very happy with my results, so I'm hoping to do a bit better next week.
Well, a bit more practice, a bit more time out the office. I'm sure that'll do well for you, Charles.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Now, I'm hearing, I was actually getting quite a few calls from journalists today saying, oh, the market's changing in Sydney. CoreLogic data out, which is obviously data that you use as well as your own. What are you seeing with the clearance rates?
Oh, look, it's definitely changing, and I think we've been watching that change for a while, but the clearance rates across the country were 69.4%, and I guess to be expected, you know, when you're thinking about a long weekend. Sydney was back to 69.1. It did that the week before last and then jumped up again. I definitely think we're in for an unusual time, but look, Sydney had 597 auctions. Melbourne's clearance rate was 89.4%. with 118 auctions. So you can see what happened in Melbourne, because last week they had close to 1,400 auctions. But the shining star was Tasmania, Chris, 100% clearance rate. There you go.
Was there any properties up for auction?
One. Yes, just one.
Now, obviously, to put some of these things in perspective, because I went to a CoreLogic lunch recently and they said a lot of the media are wanting these stats literally every day now. But can you really look at these stats, or should you be looking months and quarters and years, really?
Yeah, you definitely need to look over a period of time. There's no question about that. But you should also be matching over this time last year. The clearance rates this time last year was 77.5%. That's a very good indication that there is a change. And you only have to look at that history to really work that out. Every day is just too much to look at it to really get a great idea.
Now, what's happening with homes advertised for sale?
To be expected, down when you think about this time over last week with a long weekend, down 0.9%, but the 0.09%. But the most important part about all of that, Chris, is that the listing numbers are trending upwards over the last few weeks, and certainly in Sydney they're up over this time last year. So there is definitely a move in the right direction for the supply line, which has been the biggest issue we've had.
Now, just as we're working on the long weekend, is it potentially still a good time to sell, that suddenly you might stand out from the others because you are going to auction on a long weekend?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier on. A couple of us were chatting about the fact that there's only a few auctions, but you know, a good thing about that, it's not a good time for vendors sometimes unless you have a special property. But for buyers, all of your competition are either watching AFL or NRL or away for the long weekend. So it's a pretty good time for a buyer.
Sounds good. Always be contrarian. Now, what's happening with the rent price movements?
Yeah, they're up actually overall across the country. It's a plus of 0.24%, but some of the capital cities have struggled a little bit. Brisbane's gone backwards 0.45%, which is a bit unusual because Brisbane is a place that's on the move. It's still got a little bit of work to go, but it's on the move. And there was also a bit of negative movement in Perth, and that was a negative 0.24%. But across the country, it was a plus. So it's an interesting marketplace to watch. And I think the vacancy rates, which I know we're going to look at next, will tell a little bit of even better story about what's going on.
Well, let's have a look at the vacancy rates then, Charles.
You know, oh, thank you for the intro. They're the ones that really tell you what's happening. And the tenants, marketplace for tenants or renters in Melbourne is the toughest. I've seen it for a very, very long time. It was 0.93% last week. The vacancy rate is actually 0.79% this week. So it's just getting harder and harder for tenants to find a property. Sydney, 1.09%. Great result again for Sydney. And Perth has started to come backwards again, 8.1%. It was starting to climb a little bit, very concerning last week, but 3.33% average over those 3 capital cities. Again, that's an area that a lot of people don't look at that area, and I think they really need to look at those stats very closely.
Wonderful. Well, thanks as always for all those numbers, Charles. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you very much, Chris.